The click of the central lock was deafeningly final. It echoed in the small space of the car, a sound that seemed to seal our fate. Outside, the stunning panorama of the coastal road, with its endless blue sea and dramatic cliffs, had vanished. All I could see was Chloe's white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel and the terrifyingly calm expression on her face. Her foot pressed down on the accelerator and the engine whined in protest as we surged forward, not along the gentle curve of the road, but straight toward the precipice where the asphalt crumbled into nothing but a sheer drop to the churning waves below. My first instinct was a strangled gasp, a useless plea. "Chloe, what are you doing? Stop the car!" She didn't even look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the rapidly approaching edge. "You wanted his attention, Emily," she said, her voice chillingly devoid of emotion. "You're always trying to make everything about you. Let's see how much attention he gives you now." Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. My hand fumbled for my phone in my purse. My fingers were clumsy, shaking too hard to operate the screen properly. I had been secretly recording our conversation just moments before, hoping to finally capture the venomous, manipulative words she saved just for me, the ones my husband, James, her beloved brother, refused to believe she was capable of. The phone was still recording. The lens pointed haphazardly from the bag on my lap. The thought was sickening. I was documenting my own potential end. This nightmare had started, as it always did, with a seemingly innocent family gathering. It was their parents' anniversary, and James had insisted we all drive out to their favorite scenic spot for a small celebration. He'd painted a picture of a perfect day, a picnic, old stories, laughter. But with Chloe, there was never any laughter, not for me. From the moment I married James, I had become the target of her resentment. I was the woman who had stolen her brother, the outsider who had disrupted their perfect sibling bond. James, blinded by familial love, saw her only as his troubled younger sister, who had a difficult way of showing she cared. He refereed our disagreements with a weary sigh, always urging me to be the bigger person, to understand that Chloe was fragile. "She doesn't mean it, Em," he would say, his hand gently rubbing my back. "Just give her time." But time had only sharpened the edges of her hostility. It had grown from snide remarks at family dinners to calculated campaigns to discredit me. She'd accidentally shrink my favorite sweater, forget, to pass on important messages from James, and tell stories that painted me as neurotic and controlling. And through it all, she maintained a facade of sweet vulnerability to everyone else, especially James. That afternoon, the argument had been about something trivial, something about the way I had packed the picnic basket. But for Chloe, it was another opportunity. When James and his parents had walked ahead to scout for the perfect spot, leaving us to follow with the rest of the supplies, she had started her attack. "You know, he's not happy," she'd said, her voice a low murmur as she started the car. "He tells me things. He feels trapped. You suffocate him, Emily." "That's not true, Chloe, and you know it," I'd retorted, my voice trembling with a familiar mixture of anger and hurt. "We're happy. Why can't you just accept that?" "Because it's a lie," she'd hissed. And that's when I saw her thumb move to the lock button. "You've built your entire life on a lie, and you've forced him to live in it. It's time for it to end." And now, here we were. The engine screamed as we bounced over the uneven gravel past the road's edge. The sea was no longer a beautiful backdrop. It was a gaping mouth, waiting to swallow us whole. My mind raced, not with thoughts of my life flashing before my eyes, but with a single, furious, and surprisingly clear thought. I wasn't the only one recording that day. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, a puzzle piece clicking into place in the midst of the terror. It didn't make sense, not yet, but the certainty of it was absolute. My phone was recording her, but someone, somewhere, was recording everything. The car bucked violently and then skidded to a halt, its front tires spinning uselessly over the abyss. A shower of dirt and gravel rained down the cliff face, the sound swallowed by the roar of the ocean below. We were perched, impossibly, on the very precipice. The front half of the car hung in the air, a metal coffin suspended between the solid earth and the unforgiving sea. I held my breath, every muscle tensed, convinced that the slightest movement would send us plunging downward. The metallic groan of stressed steel was the only sound besides my own ragged breathing and the thundering of my heart against my ribs. Chloe finally turned her head to look at me, and the sight was more terrifying than the drop. There were no tears, no fear in her eyes. There was only a hollow, triumphant emptiness. "See?" she whispered, a ghostly smile playing on her lips. "It's quiet here. No more pretending. No more of your endless, exhausting performance." Chloe, please, I begged, my voice barely audible. The phone in my purse felt like a lead weight. Was it still recording? Could it capture this madness? Whatever you think I've done, it's not worth this. It's not worth your life. A flicker of something, was it pain, crossed her face before the mask of calm descended again. My life? She scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. My life ended the day he chose you. He was my brother, my other half. We had a plan. We were supposed to look after each other always. But you came along and you rewrote everything. You made him weak. You made him forget who he was. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of her delusion. The bond she described was not a healthy sibling connection. It was an obsession. She saw me not as a sister-in-law, but as a saboteur who had stolen her future. The plan she mentioned was a fantasy she had clung to, one where she and James would remain the central figures in each other's lives, forever. He loves you, Chloe, I said, trying to find a foothold of sanity in her storm. He loves you so much. But he's my husband. We built a life together. That's what people do. They grow up. They build their own families. Family? She spat the word like it was poison. You are not his family. You are a parasite. But it's okay. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to save him from you. Her hand moved from the steering wheel, slowly, deliberately, toward the gear shift. Her intention was clear. She wasn't just trying to scare me. She was going to put the car in drive and finish it. It was then that the other thought, the one that had struck me in the initial seconds of terror, returned with stunning clarity. I wasn't the only one recording that day. Why was I so sure? The image flashed in my mind, a detail from earlier that morning, something I had registered without truly processing. James. As we were all getting ready to leave, he had been fiddling with something on the dashboard. I'd been busy gathering the last of the picnic supplies and had only half paid attention. New toy? I'd asked casually. He had looked up, a little startled, and given me a quick, almost nervous smile. Oh, this? It's just a new dash cam. The old one was getting grainy. Wanted to make sure we captured the beautiful drive. He'd tapped the small, discreet lens attached near the rearview mirror. Records everything, front and back, high definition. Just in case. Just in case. The words echoed in my head. He had installed a brand new, high-definition, dual-lens dashcam just this morning. A camera that recorded not only the road ahead, but also the interior of the car. It was recording right now. It had recorded her venomous words before she started driving. It had recorded her locking the doors. It had recorded her turning the wheel toward the cliff. It had recorded everything. And in that moment, the puzzle pieces didn't just click into place, they slammed together. James's weary sighs, his constant pleas for me to be the bigger person, his refusal to confront Chloe. It wasn't just blindness, it was avoidance. He knew. On some level, he must have known how unstable she was, how deep her resentment ran. He hadn't installed that camera to capture the scenic route. He had installed it to capture this. He had armed the car with a silent, impartial witness because he was too much of a coward to be one himself. He hadn't been trying to protect me. He had been trying to protect himself, gathering evidence for a future he knew was inevitable. A day when Chloe's madness would finally spill over into undeniable, recordable proof. He had sacrificed my safety for the sake of his own peace of mind, for a gotcha moment that would finally absolve him of the responsibility of choosing a side. The realization was a different kind of cold from the terror. It was a deep, glacial freeze of betrayal. My fear for my life was suddenly eclipsed by a burning, white-hot rage. My husband, the man who was supposed to love and protect me, had used me as bait. Chloe's hand was inches from the gear shift. Outside, I heard a faint shout. James. He and his parents must have realized we weren't behind them. Their distant figures were silhouetted against the bright sky running back toward the road. They were too far. They would be too late. But the dash cam was right here. A silent, blinking red light I could now see reflected in the rearview mirror. My own recording was a desperate, shaky mess. But his was perfect. And it saw everything. The distant shouts grew closer, identifiable now as James's frantic, terrified voice calling our names. The sound broke Chloe's trance. Her head snapped toward the sound, and for a fleeting second, her mask of cold composure cracked. A flash of pure panic crossed her features. Her audience had arrived, but not for the grand finale she had envisioned. In that split second of her distraction, my rage found its direction. It was a cold, sharp, and brutally clear purpose. My shaking stopped. My breath steadied. The terror was still there, a low hum beneath the anger, but it no longer controlled me. I was not a passenger in my own execution. Don't bother, Chloe, I said, my voice cutting through the air, hard as steel. It didn't sound like my own. She turned back to me, her eyes wide with confusion. My sudden shift in demeanor had thrown her off more than her brother's arrival. I didn't look at her. Instead, I slowly, deliberately, lifted my hand and pointed a single, trembling finger toward the rearview mirror at the tiny, winking red light of the dash cam. "He's been recording us the whole time," I said, my voice low and venomous. I finally met her gaze, and I let her see the abyss of my own fury. All your lies, all your threats, locking the doors, driving us off the road. It's all there, in high definition. The color drained from Chloe's face. She stared at the small black lens as if it were the eye of God. The triumphant smile, the hollow emptiness, it all evaporated, replaced by the raw, primal fear of a cornered animal. She had been performing a mad play, but she never realized the entire theater was being filmed. My gaze flickered past her, to the figures now scrambling down the gravel shoulder toward us. James was in the lead, his face a mask of horror. His parents were behind him, his mother's hand clasped over her mouth. "He knew you would do something like this," I continued, my words directed as much to the approaching James as they were to Chloe. "He was just waiting. He didn't want to stop you, he just wanted to prove it." Chloe started to stammer, a string of incoherent denials. "No, you're lying." "Am I?" I leaned forward, my movement slow and measured, acutely aware of the car's precarious balance. My hand went not to the door, but to the dash cam itself. With a surge of adrenaline, I unclipped it from its mount. The small plastic device felt heavy, sacred. It was the truth. It was my salvation and his condemnation. I clutched it in my fist. By the time James reached the driver's side door, wrenching at the locked handle, his face pale and sweat-streaked, the scene inside the car had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a mad woman holding a victim hostage. It was a woman holding all the cards. "Emily, Chloe, oh my God, are you okay?" he yelled, his voice cracking. I looked at him through the glass and I felt nothing. No relief, no love. Only the vast, empty chasm of his betrayal. I pressed the unlock button. The door flew open. James reached for Chloe, but she recoiled, curling into a ball against the seat, finally starting to sob. They were not the tears of a villain, but the theatrical sobs of a performer whose show had been canceled. James's parents crowded around, their questions a frantic, overlapping babble, but James's eyes were on me. He saw the dash cam clutched in my hand. He saw the expression on my face, and in that moment, he knew that I knew. His carefully constructed plan, his cowardly attempt to manage his sister without losing his wife, had just blown up in his face. "Emily," he started, his voice a desperate plea. "I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I unbuckled my seatbelt and carefully, slowly, began to slide out of the passenger door, my back to the terrifying drop. I never took my eyes off him. "Can you explain why you installed a new camera this morning? Can you explain why you've spent years telling me I was exaggerating, that I needed to be patient, when you knew? You knew she was this unstable. You were just waiting for her to prove it, weren't you? You put me in this car, with her, like a piece of cheese in a mousetrap." His face crumpled. The self-assured man who always had an answer, who could always smooth things over, was gone. In his place was a guilty, terrified boy. "No, Em, it wasn't like that. I was worried. I wanted to have proof in case... to get her help." "To get her help?" I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that made his parents flinch. "Or to save yourself? So you wouldn't have to be the bad guy. So you wouldn't have to choose. You let her torture me for years, and you stood by and watched. And today, you let her try to kill me. All so you could have a nice, clean video to show everyone that you were the sane one all along." I held up the dash cam. "Congratulations, James. You got your footage. It's a masterpiece." I turned my back on him, on all of them, and faced the open air, the sea, the sky. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the salty air filling my lungs. The ground beneath my feet felt solid, real. Behind me, I could hear Chloe's wails and James's desperate attempts to justify the unjustifiable to his stunned parents. Their world was imploding, but for the first time in a very long time, mine felt like it was just beginning. The recording from my own phone was probably useless, but it didn't matter. I wasn't the only one recording that day, and the most important recording of all was now safe in my hand. I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't look back. I just walked. My legs felt both heavy and light as I stepped onto the paved road, my shoes making a soft, determined sound on the asphalt. The chaotic symphony of my former life, Chloe's escalating sobs, James's pathetic attempts at explanation, his parents' shocked and confused voices, began to fade behind me with every step I took. It was just noise, meaningless. "Emily, wait, please!" James called out, his voice laced with a desperation I had never heard before. It was the sound of a man who had not just lost an argument, but had lost control of the entire narrative. "We can't just leave it like this. Let's talk." I didn't slow down. Talk? We had been talking for years. His version of talking was a monologue of platitudes and dismissals designed to placate and silence me. My version was a scream into a void. There was nothing left to say. The dash cam, clutched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles were white, had said it all. It was the final word. I pulled out my phone, the one that was still, ridiculously, recording audio from inside my purse. I stopped the recording and my fingers, now steady and precise, navigated to a rideshare app. My location was a blue dot on a lonely stretch of coastal highway. I put in a request, my destination a generic hotel in the city center. A place with no memories. A neutral ground. The app chimed. A driver was 15 minutes away. 15 minutes. I could do that. I leaned against a rock wall on the far side of the road, the stone cool against my back, and finally allowed myself to look back at the scene. It was like watching a silent movie. James was gesturing wildly, his face contorted. His mother was now trying to coax a hysterical Chloe out of the teetering car, while his father stood motionless, his hands on his head, staring at the vehicle as if he could will it back onto solid ground. They were a family imploding, a tableau of dysfunction that had been hidden behind holiday smiles and forced pleasantries for years, and I had been their collateral damage. I saw James look from his sister to his parents, and then his eyes scanned the road, searching for me. When he spotted me, he took a step in my direction, but his father put a hand on his arm, stopping him. The two men exchanged words, their body language stiff and angry. For the first time, it seemed someone was holding James accountable. A strange sense of detachment washed over me. I wasn't watching my husband. I was watching a stranger whose motivations I now saw with terrifying clarity. The man I had loved, or thought I had loved, did not exist. He was a construct, a carefully maintained illusion. The real James was a coward, a manipulator who would rather risk his wife's life than have a difficult conversation with his sister. He hadn't protected me from her. He had failed to protect either of us from the sickness that defined their relationship. The minutes ticked by. I watched as another car, likely belonging to a concerned passerby, pulled over. The drama was now attracting an audience. Good. Let the world see. Let the carefully guarded secrets of their perfect family spill out onto the pavement for everyone to witness. When the small, unassuming sedan of my rideshare pulled up, I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. The driver, a middle-aged man with a kind face, leaned over to push open the passenger door. "For Emily?" he asked, his voice pleasantly mundane. "Yes, that's me," I said, my voice hoarse. I slid into the back seat. The clean, air-conditioned interior, a stark contrast to the dust and emotional debris of the roadside. I didn't give the scene a final glance. I didn't want to. I wanted to burn the image from my mind, but I knew I never would. "Everything all right back there, miss?" the driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. He must have seen my pale face, the tear tracks I didn't realize were there, the way I was clutching the small black device to my chest. I took a breath. "Everything is finally starting to be all right," I said, and to my own surprise, I believed it. As we pulled away, I laid the dash cam on the seat beside me. My phone buzzed. It was James. I declined the call. It buzzed again. A text message. Then another. I didn't read them. I simply blocked his number. I did the same for Chloe. It was a small digital act of finality, but it felt monumental. I was severing the connection, cutting the cord. The car drove on, heading back toward the city, toward an unknown future. For the first time that day, I felt the faintest glimmer of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The hotel room was sterile and impersonal. A blank canvas. It was perfect. I sat on the edge of the bed, the dashcam on the nightstand beside me like a religious artifact. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the hum of the air conditioning and the distant city traffic. The silence was a balm. There were no accusations, no gaslighting, no passive-aggressive sighs. There was only me and the truth, sitting in a quiet room. I knew what I had to do. The path forward was no longer a confusing, overgrown trail I had to navigate with a compass that was constantly being spun by others. It was a straight, clear road. My first call was not to a friend or family member seeking comfort or validation. It was to a divorce lawyer, I found one with a reputation for being relentless and scheduled a consultation for the next morning. Bring any and all evidence you have, the paralegal on the phone had advised, her tone professional and detached. Oh, I will, I had replied, glancing at the dash cam. I have everything I need. That evening, I ordered room service and plugged the dash cam into my laptop. I hadn't watched the footage yet, and I knew I needed to. I had to see it for myself, outside the lens of terror and betrayal. I had to be a neutral observer of my own near-death experience. Watching it was brutal. I saw myself pleading. I heard Chloe's chillingly calm voice sentencing me to death. I saw her foot on the accelerator. I saw the world outside the windshield disappear, replaced by the blue-gray maw of the ocean. And I saw the interior of the car, the blinking red light of the camera reflecting in the rearview mirror, a silent, damning witness. It was all there, undeniable. There was one last desperate attempt at contact. A blocked number can't stop a blocked number from leaving a voicemail. Hours later, a notification popped up, a message from James. Against my better judgment, I listened to it, perhaps because I needed to hear the final pathetic whimpers of the man I once loved. His voice was a wreck, choked with manufactured tears. He didn't apologize for his betrayal, not really. He talked about how Chloe had been taken to a hospital, about how his parents were devastated, about how their family was falling apart. He framed the entire disaster as another tragedy for which he was the primary victim. He ended by begging me to come home so we could figure this out. He never once asked if I was okay. He just wanted his buffer back. He wanted the woman who absorbed the chaos so he wouldn't have to. I deleted the message before it was even finished. That was the real ending. Not the car teetering on the cliff, but the quiet, simple act of pressing a button. A deletion. An erasure. The divorce was, in legal terms, remarkably swift. The dashcam footage was irrefutable. It was presented not as a simple marital issue, but as evidence in a criminal investigation. Chloe faced serious charges, her years of manipulation culminating in a single, undeniable act of violence. The fragile, misunderstood sister was revealed to be a dangerous, disturbed woman. James was not charged with a crime, but in the court of opinion, and in my heart, his sentence was absolute. He was exposed. The video showed his cowardice as clearly as it showed Chloe's malice. He lost his wife, and in the process, he lost the respect of everyone who saw the truth. His desperate attempt to control the narrative without getting his hands dirty had cost him everything. I never saw any of them again. I moved to a different city, built a new life, one brick at a time, on a foundation of my own making. Sometimes the memory of that day returns, the feeling of the car surging forward, the roar of the ocean, but it no longer holds the power of terror. It is simply a scar, a reminder of a battle I survived, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous place to be is not on the edge of a cliff, but in a life built on a lie. I learned that my voice was not something to be silenced for the comfort of others, and that the truth, no matter how ugly, is the only thing that can truly set you free. I was no longer a character in someone else's sick story. I was the author of my own. The most important recording of that day was not the one that captured the crime, but the one that started in my own heart the moment I decided to walk away. The silent, ongoing recording of a woman choosing to save herself. True strength isn't about the absence of fear, but about acting in spite of it. It's about finding that unshakable core of self-worth that no one can be allowed to break. Emily's story is a harrowing reminder that the most profound betrayals can come from those we are taught to trust. But it is also a testament to the incredible power of claiming your own truth, even when your voice shakes as you speak it. It reminds us that we are the ultimate guardians of our own well-being. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a message of hope and the courage to press record on their own life.